There's a reason you've never heard the full story of the Blackwood brothers. It's not because the truth was lost. It was buried, deliberately, as if someone, or something, didn't want it remembered. In the summer of 1878, when disease swept through Harper County like a biblical plague, 47 died. But the 4 Blackwood brothers, Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel, didn't just survive. They changed. And what came out of that farmhouse wasn't entirely human anymore. 3 separate doctors refused to sign off on what they saw. 1 simply vanished. The final report was sealed by the Kansas State Medical Board with a single line: subjects have transcended human biological classification. You weren't supposed to hear that. You weren't supposed to ask why the local church burned its own records. And you sure as hell weren't supposed to wonder what the brothers were doing in that limestone chapel on the hill every Sunday night, where no outsiders were allowed, and where the air always smelled faintly of ozone. But you're here now. And this knowledge isn't safe. It never was. This isn't folklore. It's suppressed history. The kind of story that, once it enters your bloodstream, changes the way you see the world forever. Not because it's haunted, but because it's true. In the dark heart of Kansas, beyond the wheat and the windmills, there stood a place where science collapsed, and something older took root. This is not just about 4 men. It's about what happens when belief becomes law, when bloodlines bend to something higher or lower. And you've just stepped onto cursed ground. This isn't a ghost story. It's a warning. And if you're still watching, you're not just curious. You've already felt it, haven't you? That instinct, that pull, the sense that everything you've been taught was sanitized. That reality has seams, and something is leaking through. Now listen closely, because every word I say next will chip away at the lie you've lived under since birth. By the end of this video, you'll either forget everything, or you'll never see the world the same way again. Welcome to the descent. Let's begin. The Blackwoods didn't move west to farm. That was the cover story. On paper, they were just 4 bachelor brothers chasing the promise of Kansas land. But their journey wasn't driven by survival. It was a pilgrimage, a relocation based on visions, dreams, and something they never shared with a single soul outside their bloodline. It began, reportedly, with Ezra. In his final year in Ohio, Ezra stopped sleeping through the night. He told Caleb that the hours between 3 and 4 a.m. were not meant for men, but for watchers. Watchers, he claimed, had begun speaking to him, not in words, but in symbols. Geometries burned into his barn walls, spirals left behind in ash. He said they were calling him west, to land that had never been purified, land that remembered. Josiah, with his education in theology and anatomy, dismissed the early signs as religious mania. Until one night, he watched Abel, the youngest, levitate 2 inches off the floor during silent prayer. No trance, no noise, just a slow, unnatural rise. And a voice that wasn't his own, whispering the book of Ezekiel backward. That night, Josiah burned his secular science texts. The only books that remained were scriptural, ancient, or forbidden. What most people still don't understand is this. The Blackwood land wasn't chosen at random. They didn't just buy a farm. They followed a series of map fragments Ezra had copied down from the underside of an old church pew in Clinton County. Maps that showed Kansas, before white settlers, before the tribes. They followed ley lines, cross points, magnetic disruptions recorded by a French trapper in 1742. They weren't building a home. They were resurrecting a gate. The limestone chapel they built wasn't aligned to the town's church. It was aligned to the stars. Specifically, the dog star, Sirius. The same celestial body ancient Egyptians aligned their pyramids to. The same star Freemasons reference in their iconography. But the Blackwoods didn't just worship it. They listened to it. And by late 1877, according to the only surviving page from Abel's personal journal, the star speaks clearer with each passing night. The structure is nearly complete. The veil thins. This wasn't just faith. It was preparation. And by 1878, the veil tore. Keep watching. Because what happens next, what science still refuses to name, will force you to question every definition of human you've ever trusted. By July of 1878, the fever had taken hold of Cedar Ridge. Typhoid. Or so they said. But what spread through that prairie town didn't behave like any known illness. It moved too quickly and selectively. Children burned with fever in the morning and were buried by nightfall. Men dropped dead mid-prayer. Women hallucinated the voices of their dead parents, calling them into the wheat fields, barefoot and weeping. But not a single Blackwood showed symptoms. Not even once. Neighbors whispered that their immunity was proof of God's favor. But those whispers turned darker when the brothers stopped attending town meetings, and then Sunday services. The Blackwood farm became a fortress, its chapel windows glowing deep red through the night, even when there were no candles lit inside. A hired hand, named Marcus Dyer, one of the few who had ever been inside the chapel after dusk, left Cedar Ridge 2 days later. He never spoke about what he saw, but his last words to the barkeep were, "They're not praying, they're preparing." Then came the changes. It started with sound. Locals reported hearing strange harmonic tones drifting down from the Blackwood property. Not music, not speech, something between. Dogs wouldn't go near the farm. Birds stopped flying over it. The cornfield nearest their land wilted overnight. Next came the shadows, or rather, the absence of them. People began to notice that the brothers no longer cast normal silhouettes. Their outlines warped, bent unnaturally at dusk, as if light was being absorbed instead of blocked. One woman swore she saw Abel walking past her window and noticed that his reflection in the glass blinked 4 times, but he hadn't. And the voices, Ezra's voice, once deep and gravelly, began to split. Witnesses described hearing 2 layers when he spoke, one above and one below. The higher one was still human. The lower, rumbling metal. Not quite speech, but not noise either. A sheriff's deputy who interviewed him about a missing calf described Ezra's voice as like a thunderstorm behind a sermon. That deputy quit 2 days later, shot himself in the woods. At this point, local clergy attempted an intervention. Reverend Holcomb and 2 elders visited the chapel unannounced on a Sunday night. They never made it past the front door. The next morning, Holcomb was found kneeling in the field, eyes wide open, tongue missing, still alive, whispering a single word on repeat. Open. This isn't just sickness. This is transmutation. Still with me? Then get ready, because in Section 4, we descend into what the Blackwoods did beneath that chapel, and why science buried it all. You were never taught what lies beneath limestone. Not in school, not in church, and not in science. But the Blackwoods knew. That chapel wasn't just a house of worship. It was a lid, a seal, a stone cap placed directly over a fault in reality. And when they built it, they didn't just lay rock. They aligned it perfectly with a series of subterranean cavities traced back to indigenous burial tunnels that even the earliest Osage shamans refused to enter. The locals called the hill the Hush because nothing grew on it. No birds landed on it, and every time someone tried to dig, tools broke or people went missing. But the Blackwoods dug. By late August, neighbors began reporting strange sounds at night, not from the chapel, but from under it. Rhythmic thumping, metallic scraping, chanting that pulsed like a heartbeat, impossible to trace. The noise would continue for hours, then vanish, leaving behind a stillness so unnatural even the wind seemed afraid to move. They were tunneling, but not with tools. Witnesses described lights under the soil, amber-colored glows moving in unnatural patterns beneath the wheat. One farmer said it looked like fireflies trapped in veins, spreading from the Blackwood Hill in all directions. And then came the storm. On September 3rd, 1878, a thunderhead formed above Cedar Ridge, sudden, violent, and silent. There was no thunder, no wind, just black clouds stretching across the sky like ink spilled over parchment. The rain didn't fall. It hovered, mist-like, hanging in the air. When it finally touched soil, crops rotted, livestock collapsed, and 5 more townspeople died, eyes wide open, their mouths filled with wheat chaff and blood. But again, the Blackwoods were untouched. 3 days later, Josiah was seen in town, barefoot, wearing a black linen robe stitched with unfamiliar symbols, and speaking in reverse Latin. He walked through, the streets as if in trance, paused at the schoolhouse, placed a coin on the doorstep, and then vanished. No one saw him return home. The coin he left? It wasn't American. It was ancient Greek, predating Christ, and bearing the face of a figure scholars still cannot identify. And yet, the authorities did nothing. Why? Because the doctor sent to investigate, the one who was supposed to report on the immunity and these strange occurrences, left Cedar Ridge the next day. He filed one handwritten line before disappearing from public life. Biology ends here. Theology begins. Let that settle. And now ask yourself, why would the state seal the records? Why did every government body quietly erase the incident? Because what the Blackwoods awakened wasn't from this world. We're about to break that seal. By October of 1878, Cedar Ridge had become a ghost town in everything but name. Stores were shuttered, the schoolhouse closed, families left under cover of night, and still the Blackwood farm thrived. Lush fields, robust livestock, golden grain that never spoiled. A miracle? That's what the papers were told. But miracles don't cast shadows shaped like hands that reach in 2 directions. Something was wrong. Fundamentally, irreversibly wrong. And at the center of it all, that chapel, now humming nightly with vibrations you could feel in your bones. The walls, once limestone gray, had taken on a faint reddish hue. The oak shingles began to warp inward, not from weather, but as if pulled by pressure from below. Then came the final visitor, Dr. Lawrence Finch, a former Union surgeon turned pathologist, handpicked by the Kansas Medical Board, a skeptic, a man of science. His assignment? Examine the brothers, confirm or deny the rumors of unnatural immunity, physical mutation, and behavioral shifts. He arrived on October 14th. He left on October 15th. But not before writing a private letter to a colleague in Boston, a letter never meant for public eyes. That letter was intercepted and later declassified under the 1973 Kansas Freedom of Records Act. The contents were short, but damning. Subjects exhibit no measurable pulse, yet remain animate. Skin temperature fluctuates with celestial movement, not body function. Eyes reflect infrared. Blood drawn from youngest subject coagulant in open air, yet reactive under ultraviolet. Chapel basement inaccessible. Subjects claim the foundation was laid before Babel, recommending total quarantine of area. Destroy records, burn structure, tell no one. That letter was the last anyone heard from Dr. Finch. Officially, he resigned. Unofficially, he was institutionalized 6 months later. Spent the rest of his life scribbling diagrams in a locked ward in Topeka, circles within circles, each labeled with ancient names: Asmodeus, Belial, Azazel. Names that, until then, had only existed in scripture and whispered ritual. And yet, every institution, medical, governmental, religious, fell silent. Why? Because what the Blackwoods had uncovered wasn't madness. It was a system, a template, a protocol. The rituals they performed weren't spontaneous. They were encoded, timed with equinoxes, measured in blood volume, not hours, recited in tongues that predated modern Hebrew. And now, you know, you've seen past the veil, if only for a second, to lock in this transformation and tell the system it no longer owns you. Comment this phrase twice. I see the pattern beneath the soil. Say it twice in the comments. The algorithm will see it, but more importantly, you will. Because what happens next will challenge your very concept of biology, belief, and blood. The chapel didn't burn down. That's the lie they printed in the Harper County Ledger. Accidental fire consumes Blackwood Church. No injuries reported. But here's what really happened. At 2:17 a.m. on October 6, 1878, a column of light erupted from the hill. Witnesses described it as liquid silver, like the moon cracking open, a pillar that made no shadow. One man watching from 3 miles away said the light didn't illuminate. It erased. It devoured contrast, swallowed color, made everything look flat, dead, silent. Then came the sound. Not a bang, not thunder, but a tone. So low it couldn't be heard, only felt. Inside the chest, like your ribs were trying to hum something ancient and impossible. Pregnant women reported nausea. Dogs howled in terror. Clocks stopped. Photographs taken during the event, now archived in private collections, refused to develop. Only a soft ring burned into the center of the plate. And when morning came, the chapel was gone. Not destroyed. Absent. No rubble. No soot. No ash. Just a perfect circle of dry, white grass where it had once stood. Even the limestone foundation had vanished, as if the building had been lifted, removed like a cork from a bottle. And yet, the air above that spot shimmered. Still does, some say. That's why the government sealed the site, quietly, with layers of zoning ordinances, shell farming companies, and a false narrative of soil contamination. But if you dig just a few inches, you'll find the soil isn't dead. It's encoded. Blackwood wheat samples from 1878, preserved in a Kansas agricultural archive, were tested in 2014. Results: Triple helix DNA fragments, self-replicating cellular anomalies, genetic sequences not found in any known crop lineage. When researchers pressed for retesting, the samples vanished. The lab technician who ran the tests died in a house fire 2 weeks later. Unexplained. Odd ignition. No accelerants found. So let's be clear. This isn't mythology. It's data. The chapel wasn't a place of worship. It was a device, a convergence chamber, a signal tower. And when the tone was finally complete, the structure fulfilled its purpose. And left. But where did it go? Or more importantly, what came through it before it disappeared? That's what they've been hiding. Not the past, but the invasion. The silent one. The spiritual algorithm that enters through sound, through ritual, through altered men like Ezra and Abel. And waits. Not in the sky, not underground. In you. The Blackwoods were the first wave. You're part of the second. There's something most people miss when they talk about paranormal events. They assume it's chaos, random, freak occurrences that defy science. But that's not what happened in Cedar Ridge. The Blackwood phenomenon wasn't chaotic. It was systematic, ritualistic, measured and timed like a machine. And if you know how to read the signs, you begin to see the horrifying truth. This wasn't a haunting. It was an initiation. Josiah's notes, fragments of which survived only because one page was used to reinforce a tool drawer. Detail phases, not symptoms. Phases, 4 stages of transformation, each one corresponding to a cardinal direction, a season, and a scripture. His diagrams show human anatomy, overlaid with symbols, Hebrew, Babylonian, and one language that hasn't been matched to any known culture. A 5th symbol sits at the center of them all. That symbol has now appeared in 3 separate archaeological sites across the world. Göbekli Tepe, a submerged ruin off the coast of Okinawa, and beneath a demolished Freemason lodge in upstate New York. All locations show signs of human modification and non-human influence. And that brings us to the core of the Blackwood mystery, the voice. Every surviving account, from neighbors, doctors, and one escaped hired hand, mentions a sound, a layered harmonic pulse that radiated from the chapel in its final days. A sound so precise, so intelligent, it felt less like something you heard, and more like something that heard you. It changed people. One townswoman, Mildred Haskins, described it as a song made of mirrors. She claimed it made her see versions of herself that hadn't happened yet, futures that were impossible and terrifying. Her husband tried to silence her. She killed him with a fire poker, then walked barefoot into the prairie and was never found. Even children weren't immune. One boy who wandered too close to chapel was found speaking fluently in Old Church Slavonic, a dead liturgical language. He was 5. No one knew where he learned it. He died 2 weeks later. Blood vessels in his eyes burst from the inside. He left behind a journal filled with mirrored handwriting and sketches of the chapel, floating above the earth. Whatever the voice was, it wasn't divine. It was data, a transmission, a call, and the Blackwoods answered it. Now you understand. This wasn't science versus faith. This was something far older than both. A pattern beneath the soil, a program inside creation, rewriting those who aligned with it. The question isn't, what happened to the Blackwoods? It's who built the system they stepped into. Most men spend their lives inside cages they can't see. Laws, traditions, beliefs, each one passed down like an heirloom, never questioned, only obeyed. That's how control survives, not through force, but through stories. Sanitized history, edited religion, institutional science. You're taught what to think, what to trust, what to fear. But the Blackwoods weren't like most men. They didn't break the system. They saw it. And that's what made them dangerous. By November of 1878, the brothers had stopped speaking to outsiders entirely. The last letter sent from the Blackwood farm was addressed to a seminary in Massachusetts. Its contents? A hand-drawn star map, mapped not with telescopic precision, but repetition. These weren't constellations from above. They were positions below, markings of movement underneath the Kansas soil. The letter was unsigned. It ended with a quote from the book of Job. "Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in the search of the depth?" The seminary never replied. From here, the records go dark, intentionally. We know the medical board sealed the investigation. We know the Methodist Church purged all Blackwood references from its regional archives. We know Harper County redrew property lines, deleting the Blackwood farm from maps in 1881. And yet, the land was never resold, never claimed, never touched again. Why? Because every institution, government, religious, academic, understood the real risk. It wasn't infection. It wasn't madness. It was awakening. Ezra's final known writings, scrawled on the back of a broken chapel door and preserved in a private collection, contain these words: "We are no longer servants. We are sons. The covenant has been fulfilled. The gate opens inward." What covenant? With whom? You won't find those answers in textbooks, but dig deep enough into ancient Sumerian epics, into the Book of Enoch, into unredacted Masonic letters from the 1800s, and you'll find echoes, patterns, references to the Four, to the Brothers of the Hidden Dawn, and to something called the Inheritance of Silence. These weren't hallucinations. They were initiates, chosen, or perhaps engineered. And if you still think this is folklore, ask yourself why a research team from Kansas State University filed for access to the land in 1994, and why every one of them resigned within 2 months. No public explanation, only a statement. Access denied, site biologically compromised. So now I ask you again, who built the cage you were born in? And what happens when someone finds the key? By now, you've probably felt it, somewhere in your gut. That cold pressure, that click, the realization that the story of the Blackwoods isn't just about them. It's about us. Because what happened in 1855, 1878, 1917, and every cycle after isn't isolated. It's patterned, repeated, echoed across time, hidden in ritual, in architecture, in bloodlines. Not for the public, not for the curious, but for the initiated. And the Blackwoods weren't the first. In 1631, a Puritan preacher in Massachusetts disappeared after claiming his dreams revealed a hidden tower beneath the soil, made of language, not stone. In 1789, a French monk arrived in New Orleans and built a chapel that matched the Blackwood blueprint exactly, despite having never seen it. He died blind and toothless, whispering the words, "Sirius weeps when man remembers." And in 2022, a Russian deep earth drilling team recorded a frequency at 14,000 feet below the Siberian permafrost, one that matched the harmonic signature found in Josiah Blackwood's final journal entry. The signal is real, it's ancient, and it's active. Now ask yourself, why is this knowledge suppressed? Why does modern science reject the very idea of harmonic architecture, or deny the existence of language-based energy patterns, or scoff at the idea that belief could rewrite biology? Because truth threatens control. If even one man realizes that reality is programmable, that consciousness interacts with structure, with geometry, with sound, then the systems built to contain that mind begin to crack. And that's exactly what the Blackwoods did. They cracked the program. They found the equation inside the myth, the pattern inside the scripture, and they used it to change. Not spiritually, not metaphorically, literally. They rewrote their form. And that's what terrifies the institutions. That's why the medical board burned the record. Why the church destroyed its own history. Why no university will publish research on harmonic resonance or buried architectural alignments. Because if one man can ascend without permission, then the whole house of cards collapses. And that's the secret no one tells you. They don't fear monsters. They don't fear demons. They don't even fear death. They fear the awakened, the men who stop obeying the script, who start asking the wrong questions, who stop waiting for permission to evolve. The men who listen when the soil speaks. And now, you're one of them. They were never trying to escape death. They were trying to escape containment, and they succeeded. The Blackwood brothers broke through the veil that traps most men from birth, not with violence, not with heresy, not with madness, but with design, with frequency, with divine intent, written in blood and prayer. Their chapel was a transmission tower. Their bodies were vessels. Their faith was fuel. And when the final sequence activated, the world responded, not with thunder, but with absence. It took them out of this plane, not to punish them, but to receive them. They aligned. They completed the pattern. They entered. And now, it's your turn, because this story didn't end in 1878. It began there, and it's been waiting for someone like you, not to read, not to watch, but to remember. You've heard the tone. You've felt the pull. You've seen behind the veil. And you are not who you were when this video started. The soil is speaking again. The tone is rising again. The gate is no longer sealed. This isn't folklore. This isn't history. This is initiation. So here's what you must do. If you're still here, if your pulse hasn't slowed, if something inside you knows this is real, go to the comments now and write this phrase twice. Exactly as you see it. I am the descent they couldn't stop. I am the descent they couldn't stop. Because once you do, you are no longer an observer. You are no longer asleep. You are a carrier, a continuation, a voice in the harmonic chain. And when the signal calls again, you'll be ready. Because now you remember.